things that we could get out of that chapter. Even though it's kind of like a travel log a little bit, tells about the dangers that Paul went through. What are some things you could pull out of that? I'll get it started. There was one thing that I thought, how do you determine, how does the Bible tell us to determine if a prophet is prophesying something that God told him? Comes true. That's right. You know that a prophet, the sign of a prophet is that the things that he prophesies come true. And so when Paul was on the ship, and he was with the men and he told them what was going to happen, the things that he said, number one, were very detailed, weren't they? He was detailed about the prophecy, that he was saying. And not just, oh, it's going to storm. He told them exactly it was going to storm. He told them what was going to happen. The ship was going to be lost. The men were going to be saved. We were going to be cast on an island. That's pretty detailed prophecy, isn't it? And when those things come true, you can know, based on what the instruction that we've got from the Old Testament at least, is that when a prophet prophesies and it comes true, you can believe that prophet and that it came from God, that it was information that they needed to have. What else? Anything else you could pick up from that? The fact that he wanted to go to Rome, and I think we've talked about this at a couple lessons. He wanted to go to Rome, prayed to God that it would happen. Now God he's basically said, okay, you can go. Is he going in a manner that he expected to go? No, he's going as a prisoner, but he's not only going as a prisoner, but he's going a really hard way as a prisoner, isn't he? This is going to be hard work for him, as they make their way. There's going to be a lot of fear, a lot of discomfort. It's going to take a long time, to get up there. Speaking of the fear, what else can we learn, from it? God takes those, and he comforted Paul. He let him know, I have said you have to appear before Caesar, so you're going to make it, no matter how bad it looked. No sun, no stars, cut adrift in the middle of the Mediterranean, headed for the sands, the dreaded sands, to be broken up in the middle of the sea and to die. Basically is what it looked like. But God said, no, even in the middle of all this, don't worry. Don't worry about it. I have said you're going to prophesy before Caesar. Forget that. And you're going to appear before Caesar and probably preach to him, I'm sure. Since I have said it, it is so. Tell the people that this is going to occur. So you can pick up the. Now the fourth thing I got out of it was the providence of God. Why would God do this to a trusted servant of his who is trying to preach his word? Okay. Why would God send him to Rome in such an arduous way and make it so difficult? We're whittling on God's end of the stick, aren't we, when we talk about providence? We can't really know for sure why he did it. Or even if he did do it. Ecclesiastes, I think it is, says that time and chance, occurs to them all. Was this just, this wind that occurred, was it just time and chance? And that was just the difficulty. Did God let it happen? I mean, these are all things we think about. We don't have any idea. God does not tell us. Unless God comes down, stands before us like Christ did with Paul and says, Dwayne, here's the reason this is happening. It's time and chance, right? Time and chance happens to us all. Our death may come early, it may come late, but time and chance occurs to us all. Or possibly God has a plan, that he's working through Paul. Could it not be that the 270 sailors that were on the ship with Paul, that some of them really believed? Maybe they had no idea what Paul taught. I'm sure Paul preached every single day in the midst of the storm. Whatever sailors he could talk to, whatever travelers he could talk to, you can bet he was doing that. Was this an opportunity that God had provided like he did with Philip and the Samaritans, Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch? Could it have been that same type of a situation? We can't say, can we? We've got people on the radio right now telling us what God does in their lives. You don't know for sure that that's true, right? We're not told, unless God stands right there and tells it. We like to ascribe all good things to God and all evil things to Satan, but that's not necessarily true either, is it? Because God does chastise his saints.
Would you call being arrested a good thing?
Yeah, there you go. That's a good example. We would say absolutely not. Being arrested is a bad thing. The devil may have thrown a roadblock in front of us. But I think what you're getting at is this was probably a good thing because it's taking Paul to Rome. It's taking Paul into a prison to people that never would have heard the gospel. And maybe those people came out of prison, great. God uses men to move these things forward. So maybe that was the plan, was to put him into prison and have him preach to these proconsuls, have him preach to the King Agrippa. We don't know the end of the story on this thing.
Well, along the way, he's preaching to the guards that are with him, the guards that are chained to him, and you think about their perspective, how these guards, their whole lives, these soldiers, their whole lives were centered around the idea of authority. That would make them ideal candidates for hearing the gospel when they hear about the authority of God.
Mm-hmm.
We know from men like Cornelius and the other centurions that Jesus encountered, they had great ideas. They had great concepts of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And were willing to hear the gospel.
So really, what should be our attitude about it as Christians? We don't know, and we can't state for certain that we know what God has told us to do, right? He's told every Christian to do certain things. And we read and we study that in Scripture. He's not coming to you. You shouldn't be sitting around at home waiting for a plan like a bolt of lightning to come from God. If you're doing that, you've been told a pack of lies, basically, David. Yeah. Yep. I hadn't even thought about that. That's right. That was a way God could have protected him, a method. Of course, God could have protected him, as long as he wanted, but you're right. He works through men. We know that. We know that that's the way it occurs. And so maybe that's the path God chose, was to protect Paul from the Jews, was to put him in the hands of the Romans. So what can we glean from all this? What can we glean from the lessons that we pull out of this particular chapter? How should we be as followers of Christ? Yeah, I think Paul even says that, doesn't he? No matter what happens, we're going to remain steadfast. We're not going to shake our fist at God. We're going to understand that God is in control, God is on the throne, and that's pretty hard to do, isn't it? For people that have had a child die, or people that have had, debilitating wrecks that will spend the rest of their lives in a wheelchair, that will, you go through all that in your mind. But, we have to use whatever circumstance we're in, just like the Apostle Paul. We have to use whatever circumstance we're in to be joyous in the Lord, to serve Him with all of our might in whatever we can do, and know for certain that when we die, we will go to heaven to be with Him, to live eternally, in this glorious land, just like Paul did. Don't you think all those things were going through his mind, and he wasn't just saying, why me? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right.
That's really cover to cover. Adversity is the changing for God more often than not.
Yeah.
Think about the things that they were in under the old law. An impossible situation, Esther, again, impossible. The prophets, all those things.
Yeah, and think about it, what God told the Israelites when they were entering the land. He said, remember me when you go in and you take over vineyards that have already yielded their fruit for you. Give a land that you didn't work for, a land that you were given. Be careful, because you're going to go from the situation that Ryan just described to one of plenty. And what happens when we run into plenty? We forget God. We forget all the things that, I'm speaking generally here now. Not everybody does that, but some do. When we're in adversity, we're looking up, help me. But when we're in a land of plenty, we forget God, because we're human and we start to think about entertainment. And, our basic needs are provided for. Now we're looking for entertainment and, the higher level on the needs hierarchy. So, I don't know. I think it's a good lesson to look at. Paul, throughout his life, was one of self-sacrifice, and he stayed focused on God, and I think he's a good example for us. So let's take a look at the trip. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustus band. It's interesting, this Augustus band is also mentioned in Suetonius's. He wrote about all the first 10 Caesars. He wrote about Nero, and in there he talks about the Augustus band. The thought is that it was, that band is cohort. I think some of you have cohort. Cohort being probably about 600 men. But this was Julius, a centurion of that band of 100 men, generally, is what a centurion is. And don't we, when we study the Bible, aren't we impressed by the centurions? They all seem to be men that are just, smart, kind of with it. Somebody we would trust and like to know. Verse 2, and entering into the ship of Admittum, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus of Macedonia and Thessalonica being with us. So right off the bat, we're told that Luke, we see the we pronoun there. We see Aristarchus. They're traveling with Paul on the ship. That's dedication to a man, isn't it? To follow him even into prison and to be with him. We don't know if they paid their own way. All we know is that may have been the Romans allowed him to take a couple people with him. I doubt it. I imagine they had to pay their own way. But they're going to follow Paul to Rome. Aristarchus has been with Paul clear back when they were in Ephesus. Remember when the uprising occurred in Ephesus? Aristarchus and another guy. What's his name? Gallio? No, that's Anyways, there was another guy with him that was drug into the theater when the uproar occurred. Aristarchus was one of those guys, and then he's also following Paul to Jerusalem to deliver the funds to the church. So we've got Aristarchus. He's been with Paul for a while, and now he's going to be dedicated and follow him all the way to Rome. Not knowing if that'll be a good thing or a bad thing. It's been a bad thing, right, all along, but these guys are still going to Rome with him, and I'm impressed by that. Verse 3, and next day we touched at Sidon. That's the last port there in Phoenicia. And Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go to his friends and refresh himself. Gaius, thank you. I knew it wasn't Gallio. That didn't sound right. So here we got we have the centurion, looking to Paul, and maybe he was told by the proconsul, maybe he was told by his captain, treat Paul fairly. He really is a good guy. We don't know for sure, or if he just discerned that himself from dealing with Paul. Paul, I think, is a very convincing person. I think he's the type of person that you would really be amazed, every time he opened his mouth. I just feel like he's a person that is really would be one to cause you to have strength, cause you to have a desire to serve God more. He must have been quite a teacher. Verse 4, and when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. You know, another thing that we forgot when we talked a little bit in the beginning about what lessons we could get out of this, all of these places that we're going to read about, they've done archaeological work, and they're finding all of these places. They're finding all the things, and it gives us a sense of the accuracy of the Bible. When it tells you that the Hittites lived and were a people, if you doubt them, you're going to be proven wrong over time. Same with the city of Lycia. It's there, you know, and so that's one of the things that we draw faith from too, isn't it? The fact that there's archaeology going on over there. You can go over to the Middle East. You can go to Turkey. You can go to the islands, you know, of Cyprus, and you can walk the very harbors that Paul would have seen. They're there, and they're historically correct. When we go back into the writings of folks like Suetonius and some of the others, the detail is there. The supporting proof is there. We don't need it, do we? Do we really need that? The Bible tells us we don't really, but it's nice to have it. So I think some of the reason the Holy Spirit thought to give us this information is so we can go check it out for ourselves. And when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were gone over against Sindus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salome. So it's not easy going, but they're moving. And hardly passing it, came up to a place that is called Fair Havens, nigh where is the city of Lycia. Here's another city that was thought unknown until 1895. They found it now, and there's been archaeological work done there, the city of Lycia. And this is kind of a map of where we're going. We leave Jerusalem. Jerusalem. We stayed in Caesarea for a long time, didn't we? You know, there were several trials there before we sent. Then we were just told we passed Sidon. We've gone up past Cyprus. We're going to move up here now through. We just talked about Lycia, and now we've moved over to Crete to Fair Havens, and they've stopped. Let's see what Paul has to say about the trip going forward from Fair Havens. So notice where they're at, though, and think about the ships of old. Did they have motors? Absolutely not. They didn't have motors. You know, they had oars and they had sails. Anybody think of any other device they had? That's it. Sails and oars. That's all they had. And look where they're at. They're sitting right here at Fair Havens, with all this sea that lays before them to the southwest. That's going to become a factor, isn't it? I'd be nervous about it, pushing off into the sea there, you know, with nothing but Africa, you know, and the sands that they talked about being down here, the African coast. If there's a pretty good wind coming from the northeast, wonder where you're going to go. You're going to wind up way down here somewhere, not knowing where you're at. Now, when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous because of the fast, was now already past, Paul admonished them. What's the fast? Anybody look that up? What's he talking about, the fast? The fast was now already past. Day of Atonement, that's right. Yeah, Day of Atonement, late September, just depends on the year. Late September, early October, right? Is that what you got? That's what I got. So it was well known among folks that navigate the Mediterranean. Hey, after the fast, you don't do this thing. Okay, you don't head out into the sea. See where we're. Let's go back to that map real quick. You know, you're sitting right here at Fair Havens. You got all this sea right here. You've got the sands down here in Africa that you're going to run up against. Actually, I think it's right. Yeah, I think they're right in there. So, bad wind comes, you're going to be in trouble, and it's after the fast. So, and Paul said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be hurt and much damage, not only of the lading of the ship, but also of our lives. So he tried to tell them, didn't he? The Apostle Paul. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master, that's the helmsman in the Greek, the helmsman or the person in charge of navigating the ship, and the owner of the ship, the guy that's responsible for the ship that owns it, for the grain that was there, and those things which were spoken by Paul. So their testimony was believed more than Paul's. Does that seem reasonable? The owner of the ship and the master? Yeah, yeah. If you don't know Paul and you don't know his record of prophecy, why would you believe Paul? I'm absolutely sure that the centurion was told good things about Paul, but that was not enough to outweigh the master of the ship, the helmsman, the guy that navigates the Mediterranean. So they didn't listen. And we give them a pass on this one, don't we, for not listening to Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phinis, and there to winter. That's also called, which also is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and the northwest. So they were thinking, hey, look, this is not the best place to stay for the whole winter. Let's find a little better place. And it was supposed that they would sail down along the coast of Crete a little more to a place called Phoenix or Phinis. It's also called that. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing they had attained their purpose, they loosed thence, they sailed close by Crete. So they had promising winds, looked like they could do it. The helmsman said, sure, we can do it. Let's go. So they they embarked from Fair Havens and headed down the coast, hoping to harbor in Phoenix. But not long after there arose in its tempestuous wind called the cyclodon. Cyclodon, or Eurocyclodon, has more to do with the direction that the wind was blowing than it does to any other Greek meaning. It's the only time it's used in Scripture. Indicates a northwesterly wind coming down, like I was showing you on the map just a minute ago. One of the worst possible scenarios that could have occurred. If we go back to the map, which we won't do, they're sitting on the tip of Crete with all that ocean in front of them. It basically just swept them off into the abyss. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up to the wind, we let her drive. Generally, what does that mean? We let her drive. Yeah. And if you go back to the map, you can see that. They're just waggling all over the place in the Mediterranean Ocean. And running under a certain island, which is Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. So when they got the opportunity, they undergirded the boat. When they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, they straked sail and so were driven. So straking sail is dropping sail at that point. They undergirded the ship, which means they ran a series of cables up under the ship to kind of hold it together. Now remember, this is a ship holding grain and 270 people. Get your arms around something that big. It's a little akin to a barge, and it's also towing another little ship with it. So this is no small vehicle, and there's a lot of people in here that are I'm sure by now helping. Quote, they're helping everybody. The master of the ship, he's getting all sorts of feedback because they're concerned that they're going to die. This storm has really come and concerned them. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day we lightened the ship. What's that mean? Yeah, man, if you don't need it, get it out of here. We don't need weight. If they had, anything that was protective, they threw it out. If they had, it doesn't say they started throwing grain out, but, and then on the third day, we cast with our own hands the tackling of the ship. That would be furniture, anything that had weight and wasn't for navigation. They're going to throw it out at this point. And when there was neither sun nor stars, and many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. A lot of times we read over that just kind of quickly, but that's it. They're in the Mediterranean. They have lost total control. The ship is going wherever it wants to go. They have no idea where they are. They have no idea if this thing's going to let up. We're talking 14 days they've been like this. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I missed that part. Definitely, they could not have navigated without the sun or the stars. Without that coming up, they would not have been able to know where they're at. Not to mention the fact of morale, right? You don't see the sun or stars and you're whipped about for 14 days. You feel pretty hopeless. And boy, what if even good swimmers in the middle of the Mediterranean, they know when they go in the sea, the chance of being found alive in the middle of the Mediterranean is pretty slim, because most ships were not traveling in the middle of the Mediterranean, were they? They were traveling along the coast, as close to the coast as they could do it. Most of your trips did not go straight through the Mediterranean. So all hope that we should be saved was taken away at this point. So they've reached all 270 souls on that ship are now, it's certain death. And it's probably slow death. There's the map again. You can see they're making their way to Malta. Malta is where they're gonna be shipwrecked ultimately. And you can see where they were, basically. Well, I'm sure this map maker is right on, right? When he drew that up, I'm sure in reality it was probably all over the place. Because that's the other thing about this cyclodon wind. It comes from so many different directions. It moves. Now here's where we get into the prophecy I was telling you about in the beginning. We talked about, that was one of the things that we could glean from this, is that when a prophet prophesies something of God, and he prophesies, generally, when you go to the Old Testament and you read the prophecies that we go back to and look to that's another leg of our faith, prophecy. When prophecy comes true, God had a hand in it. Thus God is alive and God is active in men's lives. We get all that from that, right? So whenever God speaks to them and they give a prophecy and it comes true, from that then we infer that what that person said and did was of God. Now I exhort you, verse 21, but after long absence Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete. And to this I have gained, and to have gained harm and loss. So he is going to say, I told you so. I mean, he's got a reason to say that, though, because God is talking to him. So, and now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life. 270 people on this big ship, and not a one's going to be lost. We're in the middle of the sea. We're not going to lose 2 people. We're not going to lose 1. We're losing 0. Now that's a prophecy that can only occur by supernatural means, basically. There's no way these guys can get everybody saved without the hand of God, without some supernatural event. We would have to be there to understand that. But through the things we've just read, try to put yourself there. This is a hopeless situation. And he stands up and says, nobody's going to be lost. 0 people. Everybody's going to be saved. That's accounting for stupidity too, right? People, we're going to learn here in a minute that some of them got the brilliant idea to take the little ship out. Paul had to warn them. Remember what I told you? Don't do it. Folks deciding to take their own life because they don't want to die a slow death in the Mediterranean. That's taking into account all these things. Nobody of the 270 is going to be lost. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. So be happy. For there will be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. Another specific prophecy. We are going to lose the ship. Nobody's going to die, but we're going to save the ship. And oh, by the way, later on he's going to tell us we're going to be wrecked on the rocks, and you're all going to have to make it in from the surf to the shore. No one's going to drown. Everybody's going to make it. How many non-swimmers do you think were probably part of that group? How many non-swimmers do we have here? People that can't swim. There's people, there's a distribution of people. There was a distribution of people there that couldn't swim, Absolutely. They wanted to kill the prisoners, okay? They had to be talked out of killing the prisoners. Paul's saying 0, but from God, 0 are going to die. That's a bold prophecy. If you were making up a prophecy, or you were one of the prophets of old that lied, that God talked to them, they would say, we're only going to lose 4. You throw something out there that would be believable. But in your wildest imagination, you would never tell a group of 270 people who are non-believers, most of them, that you're all going to live, and leave it to their own devices to make, Yeah, right. Navigator or, seaman. Yeah. That's another point we can get out of this. I'm glad you brought that up. That's exactly right. Was he ashamed of the supernatural? Absolutely not. An angel came right here and he talked to me. Now today, of course, we don't have that. We go to 1 Corinthians 13 and we go to Ephesians 4. We don't have those things today. But for him to be able to speak that way to people that would have mocked him, he was bold. He said, an angel came and told me this. He didn't say, I think, or, he basically told them the truth, that an angel spoke to me. A supernatural event is occurring here on this ship, and you're part of it. And because you're with me, you're all going to be saved, because God wants me to get to Nero. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. There shall be no loss, verse 24, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Another thing too, we're reminded of the reason for angels, right? God uses angels. We know that he uses angels today. He's using an angel to communicate with Paul. Jesus has come himself and communicated with Paul. God has communicated with Paul in visions. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, and it shall be even as it was told me. So even in the hopeless situation Paul's in right now, and we know that Paul got down from time to time, didn't he? And Jesus had to come talk to him and tell him, don't be, in one case he said, don't be afraid, they're not going to hurt you. In another case, he told him the commission that he was going to be commissioned for. And now we've got an angel telling him. And so he believes God. When he reads, when he does, when he hears, he believes God, which is a lesson for us. As we read, we believe. But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in the Adrian, that's the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. And they sounded it and found 20 fathoms. It's 6 feet a fathom. It's about 120 feet. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found 15 fathoms. So it's getting shallower. What are they inferring from that? Hey, we're getting close to land. And what are they always worried about when they get close to land? Shipwreck, rocks. Yeah, rocks. Especially in these islands, that then fearing we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for day. So the purpose of throwing the anchors out is we're getting ready to come to land. Let's get something dragging on the bottom so it slows the ship down and we don't come crashing into these rocks. Because once we hit the rocks, we're going to all be swimming, right? And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, and it says, when they had let down the boat into the sea under the color, under the pretense, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. That's why I say the stupidity part. God says 0 is going to die. But we do have men that are not, all on the same page. These guys were letting the little ship down under the pretense that they were going to drop more anchors from it. But what they were really doing is, we're getting close to land. Just forget about the rest of these 270. We're going to save ourselves. So Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except ye abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. Another part of the prophecy, right? Don't try to do it on your own, or you're going to negate the 0 part, right? You might negate the whole prophecy. You might all die, except for Paul. Paul's the only one that's really been told that he's going to. So Paul said to the centurion and the soldier, except ye abide. So he tells them, guys, you better listen to me this time. Then the soldiers cut the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So that's a lot of faith, right? The rescue boat, they believe what Paul's saying now. They're all in, okay? Everybody's in Paul's court. He says, don't let them get in that boat. The soldiers cut it away so that no one could even, use it. There goes the last, chance of getting off the boat other than swimming. Now you got to remember, while all this is going on, the ship's going like this. Everybody's sick. They haven't eaten. They probably got sores all over their bodies from the salt. This is not a comfortable cruise ship. This is a ship primarily for grain that has 270 people packed onto it, because it was probably going to be the last ship out, for the period, because of after the fast. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day. Ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. You haven't taken anything, haven't eaten. People, we're going to live. You need to eat something. Can you imagine the condition they're in? What's the sense of eating? We're all going to be in the bottom of the sea shortly. But Paul comes in and says, and comforts them and says, take meat. Wherefore I pray you take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not a hair from any head of any of you be harmed. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and he gave thanks in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we were all in the ship, 216 souls. There's your 276. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast the wheat into the sea. Out goes the wheat. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust the ship in. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves into the sea, loosened the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind and made toward shore. So they're going to go to Malta. That's where they're headed right now. And next week, on Wednesday, we'll talk a little bit about their time on Malta right here. Getting closer to Rome, though, aren't they? But without the Lord's help, they would have wound right out. They had just kept right on going out into the Mediterranean and been dead. And falling into a place where 2 seas meet, they ran the ship aground, and the 4 parts stuck, remained unmovable, but the hinder was broken up with violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. Good plan, don't you think? These prisoners, we don't want them getting loose. Let's just kill all the prisoners. We threw all the grain out. Let's just let the people live that have the right to live. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose. Did not just kill Paul, did not kill anybody. Because how many people were supposed to be lost? 0, okay? So why in the world that worked? You would have thought, well, they'd keep Paul. I could see that, but why not kill the rest of the murderers and the, subversives? But they didn't kill them. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them and commanded that they that which could swim cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped, all to land, all 276. It's a miracle, folks, that 276 people could make it through the rocks and get to land. First of all, escaping the soldiers killing them, right? The prophecy came true. Everything that Paul said happened. And so they've all come to land. They all come with a great respect for Paul, as you would think. So as remembering all the things that Paul said to them while he was with them, those days on the ship. We don't know the total days, but it was a lot. We know it was at least 14, probably many, many, many more, because they left thinking, they knew it was after the fast. We're going all the way back to where they left on the ship in Caesarea. They knew it wasn't the right time to sail, but they thought, well, it isn't going to take that long, we'll beat it. But because it took so long to get around the horn there, they fell into the really deadly time of that, but yet they kept going. Maybe because price of grain was up. Who knows? The master of the ship, the captain, might have said, hey, no one else can deliver grain. We're going to be the last ship in, which means we're going to have the market. So they made it to shore on boards, those that couldn't swim. Everybody made it through the rocks and came in. Any questions or anything maybe that you saw about the trip? So what looks just like a travel log, we can pull a lot of things out of there, from the... Correct. Boy, that's a really good point. That's exactly right. You got to understand what he's saying? He's saying it wasn't by faith alone. There was stuff they had to do. I mean, they worked. They did their own things, and one of their works was believing in the prophet of God, what he told them. Right? Belief is a work. Everybody believe that? John 6 or John 4. No, it's John 4. What must I do to do the works of God? And it's belief is a work. So those of you tell you that no works are required, belief's a work. If you go to John chapter 4. And anyways, he's not talking about any works. He's talking about meritorious works of men. Those are not required. But works of obedience are required. And believing what God told them, as Alan said, was an important part of their salvation. Doing exactly what they were told to do. Don't get in the ship and all those other things. So.